Greetings, everyone. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of CARMA, the Consortium for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, now hosted at the Rawls College of Business at Texas Tech University. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to another version of a CARMA Quick Chat, where we take the opportunity to chat with one of our upcoming presenters. And today it's my pleasure to have joining us Dr. Zeki Simsek. Zeki is professor in the Gressett Chair of Business Strategy and Planning at Clemson University and the Wilbur O. and Ann Powers College of Business. And you may also know that Zeki is senior editor at the Journal of Management. And we're here to talk with Zeki because of his webcast lecture about a month from now, in which he will discuss his work on providing a framework for methodologically rigorous review articles. So Zeki, welcome. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat today. We're excited about your upcoming talk.
Thank you, Larry. Glad to be here.
So as I mentioned, your talk has to do with literature reviews. How did your interest in empirical research evolve to include literature reviews as a research methodology?
Well, that's a great question, Larry, especially considering my interest in theoretically driven empirical research. I suppose part of my interest in literature review is a common one. You know, all researchers and research contributions obviously rely on some form of literature review, right? I mean, whether one seeks to make a conceptual contribution, advance a theory, reviewing previous research is obviously a core activity for all researchers. The same for empirical contributions, qualitative, quantitative, and mixed research contribution. They all involve some form of literature review. So I think it's fair to say that all researchers are also literature reviewers. That's, to me, a common thread across different research approaches. I guess, having said that, where researchers differ is not all researchers want to publish review articles. And it's in this sense that I guess my interest might have a different origin. For me, the literature review writing part of it emerged from a handbook that on research, a handbook of research on top managing teams, and I was asked to write a chapter that looked at research on top management teams. And I remember my co-authors and I struggled with the process of really going beyond summarizing what has been said in the other studies and do a good job of articulating and integrating the core themes on top management teams. And frankly, that struggle for me continued as we try to leverage our research interests and try to publish review articles. And it wasn't only after we were successful in getting some papers published, some review papers published, that I started thinking really, I shifted my interest from the art and craft of literature reviews to the science part of it. And frankly, the emergence of practice, evidence-based practice and evidence-based decision-making have also shaped my ongoing interest in methodological aspect of literature reviews.
Yeah. Okay. As I mentioned in introducing you, you have had a variety of forms of editorial experience, and I'm always interested in the impact that all of our career experiences have as we grow and mature as a researcher. So if you reflect back, how do you think you have evolved as a researcher? So if you're going to start a project today, how do you think you approach that task differently than you would have earlier in your career?
That's a really terrific question. I think for me, the biggest change would be the type of research questions that I'm pursuing and the amount of risk that I'm willing to take with different projects. I would say for me, over years, I have broadened my interest. And frankly, now I like to pursue and take risks with any question that gets my attention that I think would lead to an outcome that will have a reasonable chance of being read by someone. So in that sense, I guess for me, for whom I'm writing has become an important part of my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the actual process of writing, I guess a big change for me would be the process of discussing my early ideas with colleagues, getting feedback early on in the process before a journal submission. I think that process has been hugely beneficial for my research output and type of papers I end up submitting to different journals. And the other thing, I think this would be probably more related to the editorial side of what I'm doing. I also now think of journal selection as a strategic choice, frankly. You know, in the past, I didn't clearly think about where I might send a paper early on. But now early on, I oftentimes have a journal in mind for a project. Obviously, it always is not possible because research ideas and research questions, they may evolve during the execution. But journal selection definitely has become a strategic choice for me. That is the other change that I could mention.
Yeah. And so, and has your work as an editor impacted the way that you approach the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Hugely. I guess, but looking from a different perspective, right? As an editor, you get to interact with an incredibly smart group of editors, and you get to learn a lot from your reviewers, and frankly, from authors themselves as they engage during the review process, the feedback that they receive from the editors and from the reviewers. So that part of learning the how to frame a paper, how to motivate a paper, especially different papers, I think the editorial process has been hugely beneficial in that sense.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would say from an editorial perspective, I think getting the first revised resubmit from a journal and appreciating that has been hugely important to me. That the first revised resubmit, I'm not taking that lightly.
Mm-hmm.
The first revised resubmit in my mind is different than any other revised resubmit at the journal. Once you get it, you don't want to waste that opportunity. You don't want to say no to that opportunity unless you have a really compelling reason. And I guess the other things would be around, okay, how do I use the feedback I received during the review process? I think as an editor, you get to appreciate that just because you get to process so many manuscripts and you kind of see how authors are engaging different comments. Mm-hmm. And so the art and craft of writing different papers, especially editorials, frankly, I didn't have any idea. I didn't have a clue about how to write an editorial, and I learned a lot from our editor-in-chiefs at AMJ now, a Journal of Management, about different types of papers, especially editorials. So that the editorial experience has been hugely beneficial in that sense as well.
Yeah. Well, you are especially involved these days with manuscripts that focus on reviews. So what are some of the methodological challenges that review authors face today?
That's a great question. So for me, I think there are two categories of broad challenges. Beyond the fact that we could also talk about what I see in the submissions, review article submissions. The two broad class of challenges that I see. Number one, I think the literature reviews itself is a fast-moving and expanding area. There's so much stuff that's going on across disciplines, not only the management, but across all of the disciplines, healthcare, medical sciences. So you can see a tremendous growth on what is being said about the art, craft, and science of literature review. So we are witnessing challenges that really emerging simply from the fact that we are not able to keep up with ongoing innovations and developments in that space. I recently read an article actually where they were looking at their purpose was to provide a taxonomy of different review types out there, and the context was the healthcare alone. And what the authors end up proposing was they were 48 different types of reviews that researchers could actually use. And the paper was appropriately titled as Meet the Family of Reviews, right? I mean, there's a tremendous growth in types of reviews that actually one could use. So keeping up with all these developments, that has been, from my perspective, a challenge.
Yeah.
And frankly, the other thing is that this idea of selecting the right type of review for the objective that you have and research questions that you have. Not all review types are equally suitable for different types of purposes and different types of questions, right? If your goal is a quantification and to aggregate whole data across studies, obviously a systematic review like a meta-analysis would be much better. If the goal is to provide an integration of different theories, different themes in a massive body of research using diverse types of studies, then an integrated literature would be better. So I think how to select the best type of review for a given purpose and a specific type of question, to me, is a different challenge. Now, those are two broad questions that I think we all are facing currently when we try to write a review article. In terms of the actual practice, some of the things that I observed in early stage submissions, I think the process of extracting the data, analyzing the data, and then synthesizing the data in review articles continues to be a problem. Sometimes the process is very opaque. You don't see all of the details. And I always encourage people to be very transparent and report the methodological aspects of their review articles. And I suppose the other part of the challenge that I see is the process of going from coded data and analyzing data and synthesizing data into novel themes and connections. And that is another shortcoming that I see in review articles. Obviously, if you want to write a review article, you want to go beyond merely summarizing what has been said in studies and kind of configure and do an interpretation almost of what has been said and maybe come up with a conceptual framework that's more encompassing and come up with a compelling set of research questions. I think that process is inherently challenging as a creative process, but it is also an area where I see some of the shortcomings when I handle review papers at the job.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're chatting because in about a month on March 25th, you will be giving a CARMA Webcast Lecture. For those who may not know, this lecture is part of a series of 10 that we will do during the course of the year, and it gets presented live to our member schools. We have about 150 member schools globally, and then the recordings go into our video library. So can you give us kind of a preview of what you're going to be talking about?
Sure thing. My goal for the webcast would be present a framework for how we should think about methodological rigor for review articles. As I said earlier, I think there's a tremendous literature out there, and most of that literature and conversations and discussions have typically been around how to utilize a particular review type. If you want to do systematic review, tremendous literature out there. If you want to do integrative literature, and that is hugely beneficial. My goal is really to change that conversation a little bit by shifting and making it a point that when we think of methodological rigor for review articles, across all of them, there is a core foundation that should be the starting point for whatever type of review that you're trying to accomplish. And my premise is as follows. Methodological rigor, yes, can manifest itself differently across review types, but achieving a tight alignment among the review type, review purpose, and systematicity is a core foundation. And that is the framework that I'd like to unpack during the webcast. I'd like to break it down into 4 components. And again, my goal is really not to say this is a framework for doing a particular type of review, but to say all reviews probably will benefit from an overall framework in which we can think about what methodological rigor should look like for literature reviews.
Yeah. Well, clearly, I think it's an important topic by asking you to participate in our lecture series. It's very unique, and we will look forward to your webcast lecture on March 25th. Zeki, thanks so much for taking time in your schedule to join us today, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Pleasure.